There are a couple of names used for the period of time between the fall of the Roman Empire and the establishment of the Renaissance. Humanist thinkers call that period of time of 1,000 years between the 5th and the 15th century the Middle Age if they were feeling nice, or if they were feeling particularly derogative, they call it the Dark Age. The medieval age was a time in which communities were grouped under feudal societies. People who owned lands, lords, exercised judicial and administrative functions as to fill the vacuum of power which was left by a lack of a centralized government, and vassals declare fealty to these lords in exchange of the chance to work and the promise of security. Curiously, there was an intent on forming a bigger government than the feudal kingdoms, a kingdom of God, a Christendom, in which the Pope was the head of the government and the Christian faith was the element which united most of Europe. In practice, the regional authorities tended to disagree with the Church, and the idea completely collapsed in the 11th century because of the clash between two popes. Yes, in a particular time, there were two popes at the same time. And even ignoring the internal conflict of the Church, there was an external conflict that came to Europe from the East. A curious man called Muhammad and his group of friends, the Muslims. In all seriousness, Muhammad influence achieved the unification of the Arabian Peninsula, and that strong civilization started to expand, even reaching Central Asia in one extreme and the north of Africa in the other. In the case, and relevant to today's discussion, they also reach the Iberian Peninsula, in which they form the Al-Andalus region, which signify that the Islamic influence started to be much more prominent in the south of Europe. This is the backdrop for a series of bellic conflicts that were triggered by political and religious tension between the Muslims and the Christians. If I say war in the Middle Ages, you will surely know what I'm talking about. The Crusades.
The First Crusade was a military campaign by Western European forces to recapture the city of Jerusalem. In the beginning of the 11th century, Christians were persecuted by the city's Islamic rulers, especially when the control of the city passed from the Egyptians to the Seljuk Turks in 1071. Byzantine Emperor Alexios Komnenos appealed to the West for aid. In 1095, Pope Urban II called for a crusade to aid Eastern Christians and recover the Holy Lands. One group, known as the People's Crusade, reached Constantinople before being annihilated by the Turks. In 1096, the main crusading forces began to move east. In June 1097, the Crusaders captured Turkish-held city of Nicaea and then defeated a massive army of Seljuk Turks in Dorilea. From there, they marched on to Antioch, and they repulsed several attacks by Turkish relief armies. In the morning of June 3rd, 1098, the knights poured into the city. Later in the month, a large Turkish army arrived to attempt to regain the city, but they were defeated, and the Antioch citadel surrendered to the Europeans. After resting and reorganizing for 6 months, the Crusaders set off for their ultimate goal, Jerusalem. By the night of July 13th, 1099, the Christians began fighting their way across Jerusalem walls. On July 14th, they penetrated the defenses and the gate of St. Stephen was opened. The rest of the knights and soldiers then poured in. The city was captured and tens of thousands of its occupants were slaughtered.
The first of the Crusader states, Edessa, was also the first to fall after the first siege of Edessa, arriving on 28 November 1144. Calls for a second crusade were immediate, and was the first led by European kings. The dismal failures of this crusade then set the stage for the fall of Jerusalem, leading to the Third Crusade. Eugene III, recently elected Pope, issued the bull Quantum Predecessores on the 1st of December in 1145. The bull issued at Betraia briefly recounted the acts of the First Crusade and lamented the loss of Edessa, one of the oldest Christian cities. The bull was addressed directly to Louis VII of France and his subjects, and promised the remission of sins for all those who took the cross, as well as ecclesiastical protection for their families and possessions. The French contingent departed in June 1147. The French met the remnants of Conrad's army in northern Turkey, and Conrad joined Louis's force. They fended off a scheduled attack of the Battle of Ephesus on 24 December in 1147. A few days later, they were again victorious at the Battle of Meander, late in 1147. Louis was not as lucky at the Battle of Mount Cadmus on 6 January 1148, where the Seljuk army inflicted heavy losses on the Crusaders. The Crusader army arrived at Antioch on 19 March 1148 with the intent of moving to retake Edessa, but the objective was changed to Damascus. Bad luck and poor tactics led to the disastrous 5-day siege of Damascus from 24 to 28 of July in 1148. The barons of Jerusalem withdrew support and the Crusaders retreated before the arrival of a relief army of the Muslims. In the spring of 1147, Eugene authorized the expansion of his missions into the Iberian Peninsula, equating these campaigns against the Moors with the rest of the Second Crusade. The successful siege of Lisbon from the 1st of July to the 25th of October in 1147 was followed by the 6-month siege of Tortosa, ending on the 30th of December in 1148 with a defeat for the Moors.
I'm going to talk about the Third Crusade that took place from 1189 to 1192. After the conquest of Jerusalem by Saladin in 1187, the Pope Gregory VIII called for a new crusade to retake the Holy Land. 3 important Christian monarchs answered to this call: Richard I, King of England, Philip II, King of France, and Frederick Barbarossa, who was King of the Holy Roman Empire. In 1190, Barbarossa traveled through Anatolia, where he defeated the Turks in the battles of Philomelium and Iconium. But a disgrace happened. Barbarossa fell off his horse and drowned in the Salef River. Some accounts say that his armor was too heavy, and some others say that his heart couldn't last long, because he was a 70-year-old man. By the hand of Richard I, he conquered the island of Cyprus, and then he met with Philip II to retake the city of Acre, who was in Muslim control. The Crusaders won the battle after months of siege, but Philip II had to return to France because he was ill with dysentery. In 1191, the combined forces of Richard I, the Hospitallers, the Templars, and the Teutonic Order won the Battle of Shafar and the Battle of Arsuf. And finally, in 1192, a treaty was signed by Saladin and Richard I to end the crusade. Jerusalem would still be controlled by the Muslims, but Christians could enter the city unarmed. This meant a disappointment for the Christians, because the main purpose of the crusade was to conquer Jerusalem, but they couldn't. They could try again in the following crusades.
Finally, there were a couple more of conflicts for the Crusades, mainly because they went to fight different groups beyond the Muslims. The Fourth Crusade was against the Byzantine Empire, and the Fifth was with a variety of groups, for example, Egyptians and others. But generally, there are no more bigger conflicts for the Crusades as they are known today, mainly because for that time that was considered very costly and difficult to maintain, and the mentality of many thinkers in Europe changed, interested in learning about the rest of the world, and some people take that as a first step or the addition to the process that would transform the culture into the Renaissance era. But for the side of the Muslims, it's always considered that all those conflicts were bloody and unnecessary, and they keep thinking about them each time that the Western society decides to interfere in that region of the world.